All right, good afternoon, everyone. How you guys doing? Good? Good. So I'm excited to be here. I'm here from San Francisco, and I've been to Omaha. This is my first time in Lincoln. I was told that Warren Buffett was going to be here. Is he here? No? Okay. I thought he went to everything. All right, so I want to start by introducing myself a little bit. I am Jaime Casap, or Jaime Casap, depending on the language. We're going to do this one in English, unless we run out of time, and then I'll switch to Spanish. But I am the Chief Education Evangelist at Google. I've been at Google now for 12 years. I helped launch Google Apps for Education into the university space. Arizona State University was one of the first universities to use Google Apps, launched Google Apps into K-12, and launched Chromebooks into education. And I got a chance to visit one of your schools today to talk to the students about some of the things that they were doing. And actually, we didn't really talk about technology that much. We talked about hacking a lot, but that's where the students were. It's something else to be able, when you walk out, I've been a subscriber to the Sunday New York Times since I was born. And one Sunday morning, I went out to go get my Sunday paper, and on the first page in column 1, section 1A, or A1, was an article about Google, and my name was on there. And yes, I framed that newspaper, but it's something surreal about walking out and seeing your name in the Sunday New York Times. And we have today 80 million students using Google Apps. We are what we call G Suite now. We have Chromebooks in schools all over the world. We have lots of cool things that we're doing in the education space. My job is to work across the team that are doing different things in education. I get to travel around the world doing this. But besides my role at Google, I also do some other stuff. And I'm part of an organization called inquiryschools.org, where we focus on building project-based learning and inquiry skills into schools all over the country. One of those schools happens to be one that I helped start in Phoenix, Arizona, and where I live. This is the Phoenix Coding Academy. The Phoenix Coding Academy, where we took computer science and we embedded it into all the subjects that kids are learning. So it's computer science in history, and computer science in art, and computer science in all subjects in a cross-disciplinary way. A new school, we're 2 years in. This is not a charter school, it's not a private school, it's a regular high school inside the Phoenix Union School District. And besides being part of the founding team that built this school, I also teach in the school. I teach communication skills. I teach 10th graders communication skills. I go in about every 3 or 4 weeks and teach 90 kids. I've been doing it all year. I'm 10 classes in. And out of all the things that I do on any weekly basis, the teaching is the thing that makes me the most nervous. I feel that date coming. I have no idea what time my flight is tomorrow, but I can tell you the next time I'm teaching class. I just see it. It's always out there. And for those of you who are anyone thinking about, any of the students thinking about being teachers? Awesome. Oh, lots of you. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to tell you this. Teaching is like playing golf. Because that's the best analogy. I play golf as well, and I can tell you, for those of us who play golf, you could have a terrible day playing golf. You could kill birds. You can break windows of cars in a parking lot. Terrible, terrible day. To the point where you're not even keeping score anymore. You're just hitting trees. But somewhere towards the end of your golf outing, you hit a shot that you don't even feel that hits on the club head, and it lands 2 feet from the hole on the green. And you just walk up there to just tap it in for par, for example. You're like, I love this game. I'm coming back tomorrow. And that's what golf does to you, and teaching is the same thing. You could have a terrible day. You can feel like students aren't getting it. It's not getting through. You feel like you're wasting your time. You're wasting their time. Everything is just horrible. You can have one of those days where nobody's listening to you. And then you go home and you see something like this from a parent, and you're like, yes, I'm going back again tomorrow. Right? That's the impact that we have as educators, is that you don't even realize it sometimes. And I honestly didn't even know who JJ was until I saw this tweet, because I had 90 kids that I teach every 3 or 4 weeks. I didn't memorize all their names yet. So that's the impact that we have. And so for me, as has been said here a couple times already tonight, it's that we gather at events like this to talk about education, to talk about the importance of education, to talk about why education is important. And it's a personal passion for me, because I'm one of those kids that we often talk about when we talk about kids who need education the most. I am a first-generation American, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York. Sorry to the fathers or priests in the room. Okay. Hell's Kitchen, New York. Any New Yorkers in the room? It's been a while because you're usually more annoying than that. It's usually like some yelping sounds that New Yorkers make. So it's been a while, right? That you left New York? Yeah. He was like, I'm from New York. Very calm. But I'm talking about the New York from the 70s and 80s. I'm not talking about the New York today. The Hell's Kitchen today, where you find $21 tacos. I'm talking about when this was not a great place to grow up. It was called Hell's Kitchen for a reason. I saw lots of violence, lots of drug use, lots of criminal activity, lots of bad things. And my mother showed up in New York like millions of immigrants before her and millions after, escaping poverty, escaping government oppression. And I was raised by, this is PS 111, I was raised by a single mother on welfare and food stamps. And New York, again, was not the way New York looked like today. New York looked like this. This was my park and where I grew up, and not the best community. But what I saw as the factor when I saw success was education. I saw people who were successful had an education, so I decided to focus on that, and graduated high school, went to college, went to graduate school, and I get to be invited to things like this because of education, and I've had a pretty amazing life. I had a pretty amazing career. I was in Australia 2 weeks ago. I've been to Spain this year. I've flown in an F-16. I've seen Hamilton 5 times. I have a problem, but I've gotten to do some amazing things in my life because of education. There's one experience, however, that stands out above all the others, and it was when Michelle Obama, when she was First Lady, invited me to the White House to talk about education, to talk about my passion for education, to talk to high school students that were growing up the way I grew up, to tell them about why education is important, to tell them about why higher education is important. And she was having an event at the White House, and she wanted me to come speak to these students, about 200 students and all the organizations that supported those students. And I said, let me check my calendar. No. You show up, and this is what it looks like when you speak in the East Room of the White House. Had no idea what I was getting myself into. I didn't even know where this was at. I said yes without even knowing where this was going to take place. I get there, and it's in the East Room of the White House. And this is what it looks like when you speak in the East Room of the White House with those gold curtains behind you and George Washington staring at the back of your neck. And you feel him the entire time. Doesn't this look like one of those pictures that you get at the state fair where you get green screened into a background? The funny thing about this picture is that when I posted this picture on social media, my friends were not impressed that I spoke at the White House. That's what your friends are supposed to be like. They were impressed that I owned a suit. I have one suit. That's the same suit. I have one suit. That when it's in the dry cleaners, I can't be invited anywhere that I need a suit. So that's it. But I show you this picture because that's what we all care about when it comes to education. That's the American ethos, that you could work hard, you get your education, you can have a street kid from Hell's Kitchen in the East Room of the White House speaking in front of the president and the First Lady and all the reporters in the room, and that's what we do. But here's the thing we don't think about, and this is especially true for those of you who are thinking about becoming teachers. Whether you teach for 2 years or 20 years or 40 years, the impact that you have on students goes on for generations and generations and generations. That you're going to have an impact on kids that you will never meet in your entire life. Because now I have my own kids, and this is them. I have a 25-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 3-year-old. Some of you are realizing right now that I can only handle one child at a time. I like it that way. But my 25-year-old is living in New York City, living in Hell's Kitchen, New York, where I grew up, a block from where I grew up, living in Hell's Kitchen, working at CNN, graduated from college 3 years ago, and we never talked about college. We never had a conversation about whether she was going to college or not. She just assumed she was going to college. Because I went to college, and her mother went to college, and people in her life went to college. She assumed she was going to graduate school because I went to graduate school, and her mother's a teacher, and she went to graduate school. She assumed I was going to pay for that, but we took care of that problem. My 16-year-old is now having discussions about what his higher education is going to look like and what he's going to study. They don't know that the reason they get to live the life they live is because of my 4th grade teacher, my 9th grade teacher, and all the teachers in my life. That's the impact that we really have in education, that it goes on for generations and generations and generations. That we have an impact, an economic impact that goes on forever and ever. Because at the end of the day, what we have to do as parents, as educators, as a community is prepare kids for the future. Because what we need to understand is that the future is already here. Now, I'm not one of those education reformers that will stand here and tell you that education is broken. I can't. Number one, I understand the history of education, and we build a superpower of a nation on the back of the education system in this country. Everything that we've built, every invention is on the back of the education system. We took education very seriously for a very long time. From the first schools we built in Massachusetts through the GI Bill and everything in between. We built an amazing education system, the envy of the world. I also can't hate education because it worked for me. And I get to meet thousands of people every year who come up to me after events like this who will say, hey, I grew up just like you grew up, and look what I'm doing today because of education. Thousands of people are like that. What I want us to think about isn't that education is broken, isn't that we need to fix it. What I want us to do is do what our forefathers in education did 150 years ago when they were preparing education for the economy that they were facing. We need to do the same thing. We need to ask ourselves, what does the future look like, and how do we prepare our kids for that future? And we need to start with this idea, which is that we are no longer preparing kids for jobs that look like this anymore. We are no longer even preparing that, that was the industrial, and even as we started moving into the white-collar world, we are no longer preparing kids for jobs that look like this. We went from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy to a white-collar, knowledge-based economy. We are no longer preparing for jobs like this. We are now living in a new era. We are living in the era of digitalization. And when I mean digitalization, I mean everything. I mean cloud computing, technology, computer science, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, machine learning, everything, the whole thing. Digitalization is a part of everything. And the language of digitalization is computer science. I'm not saying that everyone needs to go be a computer scientist. You have to recognize that computer science is the language that we use in digitalization around everything that we do, in every industry across the board. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that there will be 1 million computer science jobs available in the next 8 to 10 years, and I think that number is soft. I just heard someone say 3 million. And that's just for computer scientists. That doesn't include all the other support jobs around computer science. And so you have to ask yourselves, even here in Nebraska, what is your computer science plan? And you don't think of Nebraska maybe as the computer science capital of the world, but when you look at the rates, there's a 3-time average demand for jobs in computer science in Nebraska, just like there is in other parts of the country. The percentages are all the same. Let's say right now, today, there are 3,000 open computer science jobs available in the state, and only like 150 kids that graduate with a computer science degree. And only like 10% of them are female. We have to think about computer science as a language for the digitalization age and what we do with that. Because digitalization isn't new. We've been doing this for a long time. Tomorrow morning, when I get on an airplane to go wherever it is that I'm going, I don't know yet, but wherever it is that I'm going, I'm going to pretend like I put my phone on airplane mode. But we've been putting technology and computers on airplanes for a long time. This is a hard drive that's being loaded onto a Pan Am plane in 1956. And if you're a businessman in 1956, you could lease this machine to do computational work, to store files. You could lease this machine for about $3,200 a month, which in today's dollars is about $30,000 a month. And this is a 5 megabyte hard drive. The same is true in education. We've been dealing with digitalization in education for a very long time. Motion pictures were going to revolutionize education in the 1900s. Television was going to revolutionize education in the 50s, and we've been talking about computers since at least the 60s. I took a computer class when I was in 9th grade because I was told that computers were going to be important in my future. And I learned how to program in BASIC. And I ended up writing 5,000 lines of code to make a bird fly across the screen on a Commodore 64. Anybody remember that? Some people. For the young people in the room, it wasn't a bird. It was just a line that just went back and forth. So we've been talking about this for a long time. So what's different? Well, there's a lot of things that are going on in the world, especially in the world of education. Number one, in the last 150 years, we've been able to collect and understand what good learning is. We know everyone who's in education, who has an expertise in education, knows what good learning is. We know it has to be relevant. We know it has to be engaging. We know it has to be personal. I can see by those survey results that you guys get it too. We know what good learning is. We don't have to invent anything new. We just have to think about the last piece of great research you've read in education and ask yourself, how do we bring these ideas to life? How do we use technology to bring these ideas to life? Technology is finally at the point where it's useful enough to bring these ideas out. So that's the first thing that's going on. The second thing that's going on, which is unlike when I took that computer class when I was in 9th grade, when I had never seen a computer, technology is wrapped around the core of everything that we do, and we don't even think about it anymore. For example, how many of you have not used technology today? How many of you have not used the web today? Right. Where most of us are on our devices or on the internet, seconds after we wake up in the morning. How long did it take us to get to this point? Who has an iPhone 10? Anyone have a new iPhone or an iPhone 9? The iPhone is 10 years old. The BlackBerry, anyone have a BlackBerry? There's usually one, maybe not in this room, but in a business room, there's always one guy with a BlackBerry. It's got dents in it, it's all rusted out. They're like, you're gonna pray this thing out of my cold, dead hands. They like the buttons. That's 13 years old. That technology they can't live without is 13 years old. Do you remember, for those of us who are old in this room, do you remember we used to have to call the internet? Like place a phone call to the internet with our home phones, and the internet would be busy. And you didn't have a problem with that. You're like, okay, the internet's busy, I'll just try again later. And what was your reward when you got online? It was a bunch of web pages that had links to other pages that had links. That was your big reward. And today, what's your expectation with technology? I get frustrated when web pages don't load fast enough while I'm traveling through space at 535 miles an hour and 40,000 feet. And if we're the generation that was minding our own business when this thing called the internet showed up, and I'm talking to the old people like me in the room, if we're the generation that was minding our own business when the internet showed up, and now we can't live without it, what do you think that means for a generation of kids who don't know what the world looked like before Google? Who don't know what the world looked like before laptops and smartphones and tablets, or don't know what the world looked like before Wi-Fi? Tell a 10-year-old kid that you're going to go stay at a place that doesn't have Wi-Fi, and they're going to look at you like you're insane. Are we staying in a cave? Are we going camping? Where are we going? Now, it's important to point out that I'm not saying that this generation is different than we are. They're different in lots of ways, but they're not different in terms of being human beings. They're humans. We don't have to be scared of them. But how they think about learning is different than the way we think about learning. We have to remind ourselves of that on a constant basis. I would be careful of anyone who would stand here and say, this generation, they're born with technology. They just know how to use technology. They're just naturally gifted at using technology. No, that's not true. They know how to use technology. They learn how to use technology the same way we learn how to use technology. But how they think about learning is different. We learned in a certain way, and this generation is learning in a different way. This is a picture of my 16-year-old when he was about 13, and he comes into my office with his lines of code. He had a bug. He'd been dealing with it for like 2 hours. I think it was on a bad loop, and he couldn't fix it. So he wanted my help. And so I made him take a step back so I could take this picture because I had no idea he was learning how to code. He'd been doing it now for about 6 months, and he was teaching himself how to code. We waited for people to teach us. If we wanted to learn how to code or learn how to do anything, we asked ourselves, what class can I take? Who can teach me how to do this? Where can I hire a teacher? What class can I take online or in a classroom, or what do I have to wait for? I can't wait till school starts so I can take a class. This generation just starts learning. How do we take advantage of that? How do we take advantage of the fact that they have the world at their fingertips? They are a different generation than we are, so we have to pay attention to that. Because when we think about what this generation is facing, they are facing a different economy than we're facing. We're having debates about whether we should bring back American jobs when most of us realize that only about 15% of jobs have actually been lost to trade. The rest of them have been lost to automation and machines that look like this. And these machines are so advanced now that for those of us who are old, we've seen pictures like this. They're a lot more colorful, but we've seen the robots or the mechanical arms in factories. We've been seeing these arms in factories since the 70s. And now they're detached and they're walking around. I get to live my life walking around looking at what people do for a living and thinking, is that a human's job or a robot's job? What is robotics going to look like in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years? What are we going to be able to do with robotics? And even if we can find jobs for kids that humans are doing today, there's a good chance that those are going to be automated to some degree or another. There are 4.5 million people in this country who make a living driving something. Driving supplies, driving people. And you can buy a self-driving car today. Today, right now, you can go to a store and buy yourself a self-driving car, put your navigation system on, and read the newspaper in the front seat while your car drives itself. What's this technology going to look like in 10 years? But there's the narrative right now when it comes to automation and robotics is that the robots and automation are coming and take your job. And I don't believe that that's true. I believe the opposite. I believe that automation and robotics is going to create an opportunity for a whole new sets of jobs. And we're starting to see this in real time. And it's already happened. For example, when was the last time one of you walked into a bank, filled out one of those little pieces of paper they have on the side with the pen that's doing a life sentence, attached to the thing, and you fill out the form, and you get online, and you go through the rope line, and you go to the front, and you say to the cashier, I would like $20 in cash, please. There would be a pause. Bank teller would look at you going, I'm sorry, is this a bank robbery? I don't know what's going on right now. You don't think about that. If there's a percentage of you who have no cash in your pocket at all, and not just because you're students. You have no cash because you don't need it. And if you do need cash, what do? You don't even think about it. You go to an ATM machine and you get cash out. But here's the thing we don't think about. There are more bank tellers working in banks than there were when ATMs were introduced in the 90s. They're just doing a different job. They're not processing money for you anymore. They're doing a higher level service. And we can see this happening in real time. You walk into any supermarket in the country during its busiest time and you see something like this. You see 20 people working in there doing what? Process work. They're taking your cans, they're scanning them, and they're putting them in a bag for you. This job is so easy, you can do it. With no professional development, no training, I don't have to go visit a supermarket to know that there are supermarkets in this city that have self-service checkout lines, right? That's how easy the job is that you can do the job. And the next evolution of this we can start seeing is going to look like something that Amazon is doing in one of their stores in Seattle, where you don't even need a self-checkout line. You just scan yourself in, take things off the shelf, put them in your bag, and just walk out of the store. Now, does this mean that supermarket jobs are going away? No, it means that cashier jobs are going away. Imagine instead of walking into a supermarket and finding cashiers like this, instead of that, you walk in, because now you can just take things, put them in your bag, and walk out of the store. But now you have people working in supermarkets, and they're not cashiers. They're there to help you find something. You know how hard it is to find things in supermarkets? Or, they're not cashiers, they're dietitians. They're nutritionists. They're cooks. We go into supermarkets with a shopping list. What would happen if we went into a supermarket for an experience? Where we went in with a blank sheet and had someone guide us through a supermarket to help us find the things that we want and need. And they would walk, oh, you want to learn how to make this? Let's walk over to my demo station. Let me show you how to cook that. Supermarket jobs aren't going away. They're just changing. The process parts of it are going away. Now, yes, you need 20 people to do cash out lines and bag, but then you might only need 8 people. So there'll be fewer of those jobs, but there'll be a higher level skill. And so if that's the case, what we really need to ask ourselves, just one last thing. This is across the board. This is in every industry, everywhere. Every job is being automated. So it's not that jobs are going away. Automation is impacting all jobs across the board. Whether it's a low-skill job or a low-education job or even a high-education job. I mean, I've been working for 25 years, and I remember the first time I walked into an office, there was a calculator on my desk, and that was an automation tool. There was a word processing machine. That was an automation tool. There was a dot matrix printer. That was an automation tool. We've been using automation for a long time. It's just happening at a much faster rate. And when that happens, we have to ask ourselves, what are the skills that kids need for this future? Now, a couple years ago, I worked with the Economist Group, and we asked employers all over the world, what are the most important skills that your employees need to have? And I'm going to show you the results of that survey. But I have to warn you that the most fascinating thing about the slide I'm about to show you is that it's not fascinating at all. It's the same slide that you've been looking at for a long time. There's nobody in this room who doesn't know. You did your word cloud around this. It was like a perfect segue. Problem solving, communication, collaboration, teamwork, all the things that you've seen for a long time. We've been talking about this list for so long, we call them 21st century skills. We're 19 years into the 21st century. My 3-year-old daughter will be around in the 22nd century. When are we going to start talking about 22nd century skills? We've been looking at this list for so long, we think we know what to do, and we don't. We got to start looking at this list with fresh eyes and asking you questions, given the economy and given the world that we're facing, given the digitalization of the economy. For example, I'll give you some examples of what that looks like. The first one, the most important one for me, is I talked to, I don't remember how, like 30, 40 kids today, I forget what it was, and I asked all the kids, and this is true no matter where I go in the country, how many of you have been asked what you want to be when you grow up? And every single kid raised their hand. Everyone in this room is guilty, at least in the last year, of asking a kid, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Everyone in this room has been asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Stop. That question makes no sense. That question doesn't work in the new world. That question made sense when we were kids, when job labor market was a lot more stable, when you could be a doctor, a lawyer, an astronaut, a firefighter, Jobs are going to change too fast. 65% of the jobs of the future don't exist today. I'm working for a company in a job that didn't exist 20 years ago and couldn't exist 30 years ago. That makes no sense anymore. Instead, what we should be asking kids is, what problem do you want to solve? What's the problem that spins in your head? Because more importantly is the second question, which is, what do you need to learn to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? How can you start developing those knowledge, skills, and abilities? What blogs are out there? What newsletters are out there? What research is out there? What videos are out there? Who's solving that problem now? How can you connect with them? How can you start solving that problem today? I just said they have the world at their fingertips. How do we take advantage of it? This is a picture of our Google Science Fair winners from a couple years ago, and the girl there in the middle, Anne, had a problem that she wanted to solve. She had a friend who lived in the Philippines, and she was upset that her friend didn't have electricity. She was upset that her friend couldn't read at night or couldn't do homework at night. So she went and solved the problem by developing a flashlight that's powered by the heat of the human hand. And she was 15 years old when she did it. I got 1,000 examples of kids solving problems like this all over the world if we give them the opportunity and the resources to do so. So that's the first thing we have to do. If problem solving ends up being the most important skill, why don't we start teaching them problem solving skills right from the get-go? Second one I want to focus on is this idea of critical thinking, because that ended up being the #1 word bubble up there. We talk about critical thinking, but we give kids endpoints in education. We give them A's and B's and C's. What's a C in journalism? You got 70% of the facts right, and that's okay? What's a B mean in your school compared to my school? We talk about teaching kids failure and how you can learn from failure, and that's great, but the word failure comes from the old world, which has an opposite word, which is success. And you either fail or you succeed, and we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world of constant and consistent iteration. You don't go to the store anymore and see new and improved Tide. You just expect it to be new and improved. If you used Google last night, then use it again today, you probably used a different version of Google because the engineering team updates Google 600 plus times a year. The Chromebook team launches a new version of the operating system every 6 weeks, and they'd want to do it every 2 weeks. And some engineers want to do it every day. We live in a world of constant and consistent iteration. How do we build that into our models so we're not giving kids endpoints, but that they're learning from both failures and successes and that they're moving forward, because that's how we get things done today. We launch, iterate, and launch and iterate, and that's the world we live in. And the last one I want to focus on is the idea of collaboration, because we talk a lot about collaboration in education, but unfortunately we don't mean it. And it's just because, and it's not a bad thing, it's just that the old model is different than the new model that we need. In the education model that we currently have is a single-player sport. It's my 16-year-old who's responsible for his tests, his assignments, his grades. The problem is that we live in a team-based world. Imagine 9th grade, typical 9th grade class, and we have kids taking a 3-chapter test that we know doesn't work anyway, where they have to memorize a whole bunch of facts to take a test, and there's 2 kids in the back of that class, and at the end of the test, they come up to the teacher and they say, we were sitting back here, and I realized that there were some answers I knew and there were some answers she knew, so we combined our skill set and worked on this together. What would the reaction be? So for a test that we know that they're not going to remember 3 months from now anyway, we're teaching kids that collaborating is cheating, when we really need to teach them collaboration. Because flip that into my world. And I go to Sundar, the CEO at Google, and I go, here's the education plan for 2019. I did it all by myself. I'm sorry, what? Did I work with anybody on the team? No, I swear I didn't work with anybody on the team. They don't even know I did this. Did I get their input or feedback? No, I swear, my parents did not help me with this. This is all me. How many more minutes would I have my job? We live in a world of collaboration now. The ability to listen, the ability to ask questions, the ability to change your mind based on evidence that's presented to you, the ability to build consensus and influence. One of the 4 things that I was talking to the students today about what we hire for at Google is called leadership. And what do you think we mean by the word leadership? Do you think we mean, can you tell people what to do and they'll just follow you out of fear? No. We're asking, can you collaborate? Can you build consensus? Can you influence? Can you take a step back and let someone else lead? How do we build real collaboration into our education models? And I'm not talking about group work where you know, as a teacher, you assign 4 kids a paper and 1 kid does it and the other 3 skate by. That's not what I'm talking about. Collaboration where every person is playing a role and you can clearly see gaps in what they produce if that person doesn't do it. You can still grade at an individual level. I get graded as an individual in a very collaborative environment. Many of us do. It's not out of hand. So how do we build collaboration into our system so that kids are working together and building skills together? So what I think we need, again, isn't to fix education, is to take the best ideas, what we know good education is, and bring it to the next level. It's a culture shift. It's the thinking about school in a different way. And we're starting to see this in models all over the world, all over the country, where kids are driving their learning, where technology is there to support and enable it. And teachers are there to guide and support what the kids are driving towards. And we're starting to see this. This is a real picture, real time of teachers working together and with students to drive collaborative learning. And what we need to do is move away from a model that served us really well. I don't want to look at this model and say it's broken. I want to say that this model served us really, really well for the economy that we face for the last 100, 150 years. And now we know what good learning is. We know what we need for the future. We know what we need to build. We know the skills that kids need. And so let's take those ideas and build education that looks more like this, where kids are building things together and making things, and they're up and they're active and they're doing and they're trying and they're doing all the things that we know that they should be doing. And I'll give you a Google example of what this looks like. This is the original Google.com. This is it. This is how it started. This is Larry and Sergey putting a bunch of machines together and doing distributive computing in a different way, doing search in a different way. And this is what Google looks like today. This is one row of the gazillions of servers that we have in data centers all over the world, including some couple miles from here. And there's 3 things I like to point out with these 2 slides. Number 1, this today can happen anywhere. Your students, your 16-year-olds have 1,000 times more computing power than Larry and Sergey had when they started Google today. You don't have to be in California. You don't have to be in Palo Alto. Any 2 kids at any school here in Nebraska can build anything. That's exciting. It's also scary, because it means it can also happen in China and India, and they have a lot more people than we do. Second thing is that this is not what Google looked like on Monday, and then this is what it looked like on Thursday. This took 19 years of what we're talking about, but it took 19 years of iteration, 19 years of innovation, 19 years of constant collaboration and problem solving and critical thinking and all the things that we're talking about tonight. Because the third thing is that this is not what a data center is going to look like 19 years from today. There is no future data center. There's just the next wire, the next casing, the next cooling system, the next light bulb, the next server size, the next everything. Constant and consistent iteration. So the truth is that there is no future classroom. There is no, what does the classroom of the future look like? The future classroom starts on Monday, and then Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then Thursday, and it's constant and consistent, and that's the future that we're building. And we need to do the same thing in education. The good news is that we are just getting started. I don't think we're behind. I think we're exactly where we need to be. Technology is finally at the point where it's useful. In 1995, please tell me that 1995 was not that long ago. 1995, some people in this room are like, I wasn't born in 1995. 1995, there were 1% of the world was online. 1%, 1995. Today, it's close to 50%. And I think that number isn't a real number. I think it's closer to 30% when you think about real internet access. And even if that number is right, 50% of the world is still not online. We're at the very beginning of this. Technology is finally where it's useful. And the other piece of good news is that we've been here before. We just have to repeat history again. We went through this with electricity. Thomas Edison had his plant up and running in the late 1800s, 1882, I think it was, 1884, trying to convince businesses to use electricity. And in 10 years, he had convinced 4 companies. So think about it. There were businesses in the late 1800s who said, that electricity thing, that thing's a fad. That's just not going to stick. And because they would look at the 4 businesses that were using electricity and see, look, they're not getting better results. They're getting worse results than we are, or the same. We don't have to switch over to electricity. It took 50 years for electricity to catch on. It wasn't until businesses changed their models, until they changed what they were delivering, until they changed how they were doing things, that they could take advantage of electricity. And that's where we are today. If all we do is take technology and put it on top of our current system, then all we're doing is making the old system faster and more efficient. We have to change the models of education and then ask ourselves, how do we use technology to bring these ideas to life? We're at the very beginning of this. And so the last thing I want you to think about is that it's not about technology. It's not about what the latest, greatest trend is, because that's going to constantly change and shift. And as the example is, I want you to think about a 5-year-old. I want you to think about any typical 5-year-old or my 4-year-old that you saw a picture of. But think about like a small kid, 5-year-old, and then think about your latest and greatest technology, whether it's your MacBook, your MacBook Air, your MacBook Pro, your iPad Extra Large, your Surface tablet, your iPhone X, your whatever they're called. For me, it's the Pixel 2. Anyone have Pixel? No? The latest and greatest technology from the most innovative company in the world? I'm kidding. But I want you to think about that 5-year-old and this latest and greatest technology. This is like 7 months old. And then realize that this is the worst technology that 5-year-old will ever see in their life. This is their Commodore 64. In 20 years, they're going to be 25 years old, and they're going to be shopping in a thrift store, because that's what 25-year-olds do. And they're going to find this in the 50-cent box. And she's going to be hanging out with her younger friends, and she's going to say, oh, you guys, I have to have this. My dad had one of these. Because she's going to want to bring home to put on her shelf like a museum piece. The way some of you have old technology sitting on your shelf like museum pieces. And she's going to say to these younger siblings or younger friends, she's going to say, you guys, I swear you're not going to believe me, but this is true. There's YouTube videos about this. That's the port. And the younger kids are going to be like, what's that for? And like, I swear you're not going to believe me. My dad had to plug this into the wall. And her younger friend's like, for what? Like, to like take it out of the box and activate the nuclear battery? No. Every day. For hours, this thing was plugged into the wall. Sometimes it wouldn't even last all day. In the middle of the day, you have to plug it back into the wall for hours. And the younger siblings or the younger friends are going to be like, oh my God, how do they live like that? Those are the kids who are starting in the fall in our school system. It's not about technology. It's about what are the models that we need to build. Do we have the right infrastructure in place? Do we have the right learning models in place so that these kids can develop the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that they're going to need to solve the problems that they're interested in solving? And that's why I hope we gather at events like this. Thank you very much.